Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel says it has struck around 800 Hezbollah targets across Lebanon, where the health ministry says more than 274 people have been killed. More than 1,000 others have been injured. The Pentagon says the US is sending additional troops to the Middle East in the context of the sharp spike in violence between Israel and Hezbollah. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the United States, where he's set to unveil a plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. And more than 140 world leaders descend on New York for the annual UN General Assembly. This amidst growing calls for the global body to reform. Very warm welcome to you. We begin in Lebanon, where the country's health ministry says 274 people have been killed today alone in a wave of Israeli airstrikes. Well, in addition to these deaths, which included 21 children, 39 women and medics, more than 1,000 other people have been injured. Well, after nearly a year of war in Gaza, Israel has begun shifting its focus to its northern border, where Hezbollah has been firing rockets throughout the course of the day into Israel, this in support of its ally, Hamas. Well, the Israeli military says it is increasing the scope of its airstrikes, and there are growing concerns that a full-blown war could break out. Meanwhile, throughout the course of today, Lebanese mobile phones have been receiving automated messages and calls warning citizens to evacuate their areas. Well, in a bid to support those who've been displaced, schools are being made available for those people who are in need of shelter. Well, during the last hour or so, the US announced that it is going to be sending additional troops to the Middle East, this in the context of the spike in violence between Israel and Hezbollah. Well, let's get the latest from the Lebanese capital now. We can cross the journalist Hannah Davis, who joins us now from Beirut. Hannah, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Let's start by talking about the apparent focus of the Israeli strikes. Which areas have been targeted, and what is the situation like in those places?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. So right now, this has been the heaviest Israeli bombardment in Lebanon since the fighting started between Hezbollah and Israel on October 8th in the country. So we've seen Israel targeting throughout the entire country, throughout all of Lebanon. They've been hitting heavily in the south. They've been hitting in the east, in the eastern Bekaa Valley. They also, for the first time, hit the Mount Lebanon district in the north of Lebanon, which is about 1,000 kilometers from the border. So the airstrikes are very severe. They're causing a lot of damage to civilian infrastructure. Israel says that they are targeting Hezbollah military targets. However, we have seen already, as you said earlier, hundreds of civilian casualties, and thousands have been injured. Reports from people I know in the south, they're saying that infrastructure has been destroyed, bridges have been destroyed, roads have been destroyed, many people's homes have been destroyed. So this has caused a mass exodus of people to flee the south. So earlier this morning, we saw the South Lebanon highway was packed with cars, while in videos you can see Israeli airstrikes going off around them. There were thousands of people trying to flee, trying to find safety in the north. We also saw today, about an hour ago, Israel reportedly targeted the southern suburbs of Dahieh, commonly known as Dahieh again. This was the second time Israel has struck the southern suburbs this week. So they struck the suburbs on Friday, targeting head Hezbollah commanders and operatives who were meeting in the residential building. This led to over 50 deaths and hundreds more injured. They're still searching for missing in the rubble. So, and today, as you said, it's been mass casualties, mass injuries. So really in Lebanon now, in Beirut, across the country, we're seeing a huge sense of panic, a huge sense of fright a huge sense of exhaustion. People are trying to get in contact with the relatives. They're trying to find homes, trying to find places for people. Notably in Lebanon, it's not that they don't have the advanced air defense systems that Israel has. They don't have sirens to warn civilians when there's an attack. Displaced many people in the south don't have a place to go. They don't have money. They don't have families. So there's been a collective effort in Beirut, to reach out to people who have been displaced, to offer their homes. But surely we'll see many people without a place to go, stuck either in the south or, in a shelter in Beirut without a place. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. And I just wanted to ask you about the warnings people are being given, because we've heard the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu telling Lebanese citizens to get out of harm's way. He's saying evacuate to safety. I just want to ask you about the evacuation process and these calls to civilians to leave a certain area. They've been getting messages on their mobile phones. Are these warnings realistic? And have these people got places they can actually go to that will be safe?
Yeah, well, to answer, first of all, the first part of your question, these warnings, it's unclear. The Lebanese information minister reported today that there were thousands of reports of people in Beirut and across the country receiving these warnings to evacuate their homes and their offices. The Lebanese culture minister, he received a warning to leave his office immediately. However, they've announced these warnings may not be real, they may not be legit. So people are not, these warnings from the unknown numbers on the callers, people are not evacuating from these warnings. However, as I said earlier, many people are fleeing the south en masse, looking for places to go. And in response to your second question, as I said, many people will not have a place to go. Even months ago, the displacement shelters in Lebanon were already overcrowded and they were already under-resourced. The Lebanese government has been suffering from a financial crisis since 2019. So there are just simply not enough resources to help the thousands who have been displaced and who are in need of food, of blankets, of shelter. It's a severe humanitarian crisis and situation. And, people don't have work, they don't have jobs, many don't have income. For some, they don't even have the money to leave the south. They can't even afford transportation to get out of the bombardment. So they're waiting it out, which unfortunately, Israel has promised to do whatever it can to return the residents in the north of Israel. So we're likely to see this escalating, and we're likely to see more casualties, more civilian casualties, and more damage, and more people who are displaced without the resources to help them, unfortunately.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Journalist Hannah Davis in Beirut, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's get the latest from the other side of the border. We can speak now to Sarah Coates, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Sarah, I'd just like to ask you, picking up on some of what we've been hearing there from Beirut, about what Israel is saying about its airstrikes on Lebanon and why it's targeting the areas it's targeting.
Certainly, the Israeli military considers these areas to be Hezbollah strongholds and has come out to say that it's hitting homes, that Hezbollah uses civilian homes to store weapons, accusing Hezbollah of using civilians to hide behind. Now, we have heard from the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant throughout the course of the day, but he has just come out his office to say that over the course of the day, through these hundreds of strikes that have been carried out on both the south of Lebanon and also the Bekaa Valley, that half of Hezbollah's medium and short-range rockets have been destroyed, with Yoav Gallant adding that the IDF is crushing Hezbollah infrastructure that's been built up for decades, saying that the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, now remains alone. But what we do need to remember here is the amount of pressure that the Israeli government, including Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, has been under to return these some 60,000 internally displaced Israeli residents back to the north. They've been demanding that the security situation change, that the status quo needs to change for them to return home, and for these Hezbollah fighters and personnel to be pushed further back behind the Litani River so they can once again come home.
I mean, what are people saying there about the Israeli military strategy here? Are we going to be looking at purely airstrikes that we've seen up until this point? Or do you think, is there word that perhaps Israel could be planning a ground invasion?
That remains unclear at this hour. We have heard from the Israeli spokesperson Daniel Hagari a little earlier today. He said that right now Israel is focusing on this aerial campaign, trying to wipe out Hezbollah's capabilities to fire rockets into Israel. But of course, that ground operation has not been ruled out. There have been many reports of a number of troops being moved to this northern border. And we do know that the Israeli military has drawn up and also approved a plan for the north when it comes to a ground operation. So certainly this is on the cards, and this is potentially one of the other reasons that the Pentagon has announced over the past hour or so that it is deploying additional troops to the region, really fearing potential further escalation than what we've seen over the past day. So certainly this is very worrying. But in terms of Israel's strategy, there has been a lot of criticism over what this has been looking like over the past few months. Israel's been criticized over its strategy in Gaza, many people saying that there is no strategy, and also in the north. And this is potentially why we are really seeing such a heavy bombardment from Israeli forces over the past day of these southern and also eastern parts of Lebanon, really trying to prove something here, that Israel does have control of the situation.
And with regards to the dozens of rockets and missiles that have been fired by Hezbollah into northern Israel, do you get the impression that the majority of them are being intercepted? Because, of course, Israel has this Iron Dome system. Are some of them getting through? And what's the scale of the damage being inflicted on the Israeli side of the border?
Certainly some of these rockets, these missiles are getting through. We've seen many pictures circulating on social media showing direct hits, some of these in the West Bank, some of these in the northern parts of the country. And of course, with the sheer amount of rockets that have been fired by Hezbollah over the past day, the Iron Dome has been somewhat overwhelmed in many parts, simply due to the number of rockets in these barrages that have been sent over. So one thing that I've been hearing really from a lot of analysts over the last few months when I've been talking to them in these northern regions is they have been talking about the potential prospect of what we're seeing now, saying that it would have mass casualties on both sides, the Lebanese side and the Israeli side, simply due to the fact that Hezbollah is believed to have some 150,000 rockets. Many of them can reach very, very deep inside Israel. And we do understand that many of these long-range rockets have not been used yet today. So this, of course, is very worrying to Israeli officials who are really battling to keep up and try and defend Israel with the sheer amount of missiles that have been fired over.
Let's talk about what's happening in Gaza. Reports today that Israeli airstrikes killed 8 Palestinians this morning. That was in central Gaza. Amongst the dead, reported to be 5 children. Just tell us what the situation is across Gaza right now.
Certainly a lot of attention has been focused away from Gaza over the past few weeks, but what we do know is that these airstrikes are continuing. Now, we are talking about an absolutely dire situation for these people on the ground. They've been battling through extremely hot temperatures. It gets extremely hot, as you would know, being there where you are in this part of the world over summer. And this morning, the rain began to fall. These tents that people have been sheltering in, as we know, they've been displaced, many of them from their homes. They were inundated with water this morning. So now these people are not only battling being away from their homes, but now they're in these tents with little possessions that they have, and they are being inundated with water. So once again, it's an absolutely dire situation for the people on the ground. And we are hearing reports now that the Prime Minister Netanyahu, he is potentially planning a siege on the north of the Strip in a bid to try and isolate any Hamas fighters that may actually be left in these northern regions. The plan is that we are hearing that he may actually give anyone in the north of the Strip a week to vacate, and after that it would be declared a military zone, and Israel would stop any kind of humanitarian aid from going into that northern part to try and once again lay siege to these people, and then potentially use this as a way of forcing the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, to the negotiating table to see a ceasefire deal and the release of these hostages. But once again, Netanyahu, he is coming under a lot of criticism for blocking a deal, although he says that he simply is not doing that.
Okay, and just lastly, reports of electricity outages across the Golan Heights. That's because towns there have been targeted by Hezbollah missiles. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we do understand that 2 municipalities are facing power outages in the north, and this is really something that Israeli authorities have been saying that they've been working on for these past few weeks, anticipating a situation such as this. But this is, as I do understand, confined to a couple of northern areas. No such thing here in Tel Aviv, where I am, but this is, of course, a big concern for Israeli authorities. They've really been trying to shore up plans over these past few weeks, as I mentioned, on all of these electrical infrastructure plans to try and make sure that there is not an event where hospitals go out of action, many other, large structures go out of action, which would cause a lot of panic and really a frenzy around the country. So certainly these are initial reports I'm hearing for these energy outages in the north. But of course, we will continue to bring you more information as it comes to hand.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that update from Tel Aviv. Sarah Coates, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring you some other news stories we're following for you now. At least 7 people have died in Japan after heavy rain triggered flooding and landslides across the central prefecture of Ishikawa. This is the latest disaster to strike this area of Japan, which is still recovering from a massive, deadly earthquake at the start of the year. 2 people are missing there, and many houses are reported to be without power. Sri Lanka's new president took office today. That man is Anua Kamara-Dissanayake. The Marxist-leaning politician was voted in on an anti-corruption ticket and promises to breathe new life into the country's fragile economy. There have been violent clashes in Bolivia between rival factions. On one side, supporters of President Luis Arce and his government. On the other side, protesters who are loyal to the former president, Evo Morales. Well, in the city of El Alto, the 2 sides threw firecrackers, homemade explosives and stones at each other. And this violence comes just ahead of next year's presidential election. Some business news stories we're following for you now. Washington is toughening its approach to Beijing, and a US ban is being weighed on the sale of connected and self-driving cars. These in particular that are equipped with Chinese and Russian software and hardware. Well, the US Department of Commerce cited national security as being the reason for this ban, which would effectively bar Chinese cars from entering the US market. The US and India have reached an agreement to set up a semiconductor plant in the world's most populous nation. The announcement followed talks during the weekend between the US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, New Delhi is keen to position the country as being an alternative supplier to China. Elon Musk has warned that another Democratic presidency would, and I quote, destroy the Mars program and doom humanity. The billionaire owner of SpaceX says that growing levels of bureaucracy are stifling the space program. Well, the Republican candidate Donald Trump, whom Musk supports, has promised to support the goal of reaching Mars. The UN General Assembly is now underway in New York, and it is the first such gathering since last year's 7th of October attack in Israel, which triggered the war in Gaza and now an uptick of violence in Lebanon. Well, as well as discussing these specific issues during the course of the week, there are growing calls for the UN to reform as public perception of the international body has become increasingly pessimistic. Our correspondent Mitch McCann filed this report.
It's the biggest week on the UN calendar. World leaders, government officials, all descending on New York to meet and to speak in front of the world. But even those who watch High Level Week closely are sceptical it will achieve anything.
I think at its best, UNGA is an opportunity for states who have problems with one another to avoid shooting each other and to actually come together and discuss global issues that challenge humanity. But it can often just end up a festival of bloviation.
Bloviating meaning empty, pompous political speeches. Simon Adams' view isn't a unique one, but it comes at a critical time. Right now, discussions are underway about adding more permanent members to the powerful UN Security Council, something likely to be front of mind for many nations in New York this week.
I think the fact that the UN Security Council is kind of unable to have any meaningful role in solving, the four biggest conflicts in the world at the moment, Ukraine, Gaza, Myanmar and Sudan, casts like a dark shadow over the entire UN and causes people to lose faith in the future of the UN.
The US has voiced support for 2 permanent seats for African nations and another seat to be rotated among island developing states. But don't expect any new members to usher in radical change at the Security Council.
Now, that is a political lunacy, for want of a better word, or a pipe dream, political pipe dream, because that is not how the council works. And everybody knows that. But what would be the difference is that you would actually have a more representative council.
With world leaders arriving here, it's 2 US politicians everyone will be looking out for. With the world's media in New York, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris may choose to show up.
The US is critical to the future of the UN, an international body doing its best to remain relevant when some, including political leaders, are questioning its worth.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the United States, where he is due to present a plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. Well, during his visit, President Zelensky will be holding talks with President Joe Biden, as well as the 2 other presidential hopefuls, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Well, one of the main messages the Ukrainian leader will be bringing with him is for his country to be given more weapons. And with that in mind, he visited a munitions factory in Pennsylvania during the weekend, which produces crucially important artillery shells. For more, I'm joined from Kyiv by the Ukrainian MP for the Holos party, Lesia Vasylenko. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Your president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is in the United States. He's expected to present this victory plan aimed at ending the war. What's in this plan?
Unfortunately, the only person who knows about this plan is Volodymyr Zelensky and by now President Biden. This was the condition of making this victory plan work, that first and foremost it will be disclosed to the US president.
Okay, so details of the plan, top secret. We do know, however, that Volodymyr Zelensky, your president, will be meeting the US President Joe Biden. He'll also be meeting Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Overall, what sort of a welcome do you think he's getting there in the United States compared to other visits he's made in the past?
At this present moment, it is critical to harness further support for Ukraine. So we are very hopeful in Ukraine that the president of Ukraine will still be welcomed warmly, with the full understanding that Ukraine is a critical pivot to global defense and security.
And what sort of a difference do you think it makes in President Zelensky's mind? Which one of the two White House hopefuls comes out as the next president?
It doesn't make a difference for us Ukrainians. For us, it is crucial to make sure that there is a bipartisan support coming from both parties, and not just from the political circles, but also from civil society, from the lay American, as well as from the American business, especially the companies that are producing military supplies, that are producing weapons. And this is what our diplomatic circles, our diplomats, our ambassadors is working towards. And this is what President Zelensky is working towards. This is exactly why he is meeting not just President Biden, but also the two presidential candidates from both parties.
But don't you think that perhaps there's a sense in Kyiv that more of the same and continuity in the form of the Harris presidency versus the Trump presidency would be a preferred scenario?
Our preferred scenario is for the next US president to have full realization of the situation on the ground in Ukraine, and to realize also that without Ukraine, there cannot be renewed global peace and long-term stability in the world. And as long as the next US president has full awareness of this and is ready to act upon ensuring global peace and security and pushing back on autocracy, the autocracy being at this moment Russia as the biggest threat to the growing of autocratic regimes in the world, then we're good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Ukrainian MP Lesia Vasylenko, thank you very much for speaking to us. Let's go back to our correspondent Mitch McCann, who filed that report we saw a little earlier on the UN General Assembly. And we can cross to New York and speak to Mitch now. Mitch, got lots of things I wanted to talk to you about. That news just into us, though, that the United States is going to be sending additional troops to the Middle East. What more can you tell us about this decision?
Yeah, good afternoon from New York. That news only coming out of the Pentagon in the last couple of hours, and it really comes amid a time of rising tensions in the Middle Eastern region, as you've just been covering. Of course, in the last 24 hours, it's been reported up to 270 people have died inside Lebanon as a result of those Israeli strikes, and that follows number of strikes over the last week, including the incident last week that involved exploding pages and two-way radios, something that Israel is yet to claim responsibility for. But the Pentagon has announced in the last couple of hours, as you mentioned, that more troops from the United States are going to be heading to that region, quote, out of an abundance of caution. Now, Major General Pat Ryder at the Pentagon said this morning that would be happening, but didn't say how many troops would be going or what their focus would be in the Middle East. And they are joining, according to the Associated Press, 40,000 US troops already in the region at the moment, amid fears of an all-out war in the region. So the US really taking this seriously by announcing more troops heading there in the coming hours.
Right, now you're at the, it looks like you're at the UN headquarters there, where of course the UN General Assembly is getting underway. And this is the first General Assembly since the 7th of October attacks. I mean, there's going to be a pretty long list, isn't there, of geopolitical issues to be discussed. I mean, hard to know even where they're going to begin.
Well, that's right. Comes at a critical time with duties, but it also at a critical. You know, there's three major wars raging around the world at the moment: in Gaza, in Ukraine, and also in Sudan. Now, Sudan and Ukraine were discussed, of course, but this is the first war, first United Nations General Assembly since the war in Gaza started. Key theme among many speeches at the General Assembly in the coming days, and working out how the UN can help solve any of these crises, if at all. as I mentioned, it's also a critical time for the United Nations. It's reported in the New York Times this morning that 220 workers from the UN have died carrying out humanitarian duties in Gaza in the last year. At the same time, the UN is under-resourced in many areas. It hopes to carry out humanitarian work around the world. So it's running out of money, and a number of its staff have been affected by these crises as well. So there's a lot to discuss, and that General Assembly debate starts tomorrow morning. But at the moment, we've been hearing from speakers talking about the Summit of the Future, a critical summit talking about and really going forward.
Okay, Mitch, we're going to have to leave it there because we've taken a couple of hits on the satellite connection there. Apologies to our viewers for the unstable connection there with our correspondent in New York, Mitch McCann. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get a quick reminder of our top stories here on Al Arabiya News. Israel says it has struck around 800 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. The country's health ministry says more than 274 people have been killed and more than 1,000 others have been injured. The Pentagon says the US is sending additional troops to the Middle East in the context of this sharp spike in violence between Israel and Hezbollah. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the United States, where he's due to unveil a plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. And more than 140 world leaders have descended on New York for the annual UN General Assembly. It's amidst growing calls for the global body to reform. That's all we have time for today's News Bulletin. Up next is Hadley Gamble, and then at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join Rosanna Lockwood for Global News Today. That's a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and decision makers. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned if you can.